The Sinharaja Forest Reserve of Sri Lanka stands as one of the most remarkable natural heritages on Earth, a fragment of ancient tropical rainforest that embodies not just the ecological richness of an island nation, but also the geological memory of the planet itself. Often described as a living relic of the supercontinent Gondwana, Sinharaja represents a continuity of life that stretches back to the Jurassic period, a claim that has given it almost mythical status among scientists, conservationists, and nature enthusiasts. When people say it is nearly 200 million years old, they are not referring to the age of individual trees or even the exact age of the forest floor, but rather to the continuity of its ecosystem and the lineage of its plant and animal life that trace their roots back to the time when Sri Lanka was still joined with Africa, India, and South America in a single landmass. This alone makes Sinharaja not merely a forest, but an evolutionary archive, a biological library that holds within it the genetic memory of ancient life on Earth. Located in the southwestern part of Sri Lanka, Sinharaja spans an area of about 88.6 square kilometers. Though relatively small compared to the Amazon or Congo rainforests, its ecological significance is disproportionately large because of its extraordinary biodiversity and endemic species. The forest sits on the central southern hills of Sri Lanka and is flanked by valleys and rivers that make it a critical watershed for the island. This positioning has also ensured that the forest receives heavy rainfall throughout the year, feeding its lush canopy and undergrowth. The terrain is rugged, with ridges, slopes, and valleys, which has helped preserve it from large-scale human settlement for centuries. It is this geographical isolation, combined with consistent rainfall and equatorial sunlight, that has allowed Sinharaja to maintain its ecological continuity while many other ancient forests around the world have disappeared. Biodiversity is perhaps the most celebrated characteristic of Sinharaja. Scientists estimate that more than 60% of the trees in the forest are endemic, meaning they are found nowhere else on Earth. The forest canopy, dense and multi-layered, shelters giant hardwoods, creepers, lianas, and an understory filled with shrubs and medicinal plants. Among its most iconic trees are species such as the hora, na, and milla, which tower above the rest of the vegetation like guardians of time. The fauna of Sinharaja is no less spectacular. It is home to rare and endemic birds like the Sri Lanka blue magpie, the red-faced malkoha, and the green-billed kukal. Mammals include the purple-faced langur, an endemic monkey, and small populations of leopards that move stealthily across the forest. Amphibians and reptiles thrive in the moist undergrowth, many of which have not been documented anywhere else. What makes Sinharaja unique is not only the presence of these species, but the density of endemic life, which has led scientists to describe it as one of the most biologically valuable rainforests in Asia. The forest is not only a haven for wildlife, but also a repository of cultural and social significance for Sri Lanka. For centuries, local communities living on the edges of Sinharaja have relied on its resources in sustainable ways. Villagers collected medicinal plants, honey, and rattan, while maintaining a respectful distance from its core. Folklore surrounding the forest is abundant, with stories of lions, spirits, and protective deities that inhabit the trees and rivers. Even the name Sinharaja, which translates to Lion King, suggests its place in the mythological imagination of the island. The forest has long been seen as both a provider and a protector, shaping the cultural identity of communities that live in its shadow. At the global level, Sinharaja plays an irreplaceable role in regulating climate and sustaining ecological balance. As a tropical rainforest, it acts as a carbon sink, absorbing vast amounts of carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen into the atmosphere. It also regulates rainfall patterns and maintains the hydrological cycle for much of southwestern Sri Lanka. The rivers that originate in Sinharaja feed into agricultural lands, ensuring that rice paddies and tea plantations in the surrounding regions remain fertile. Without the forest, the entire ecological balance of the region would collapse, leading to soil erosion, droughts, and floods. Thus, Sinharaja is not just a local treasure, but a critical component of the planet's ecological infrastructure. Despite its significance, Sinharaja faces numerous threats. Historically, the forest was spared from large-scale destruction because of its rugged terrain and relative inaccessibility. However, in the 20th century, it was subjected to logging, particularly for valuable hardwoods. Though commercial logging has since been banned, the scars of that period are still visible in parts of the reserve. Today, the main threats come from encroachment, illegal timber felling, and agricultural expansion. Local communities under economic pressure sometimes clear patches of land for crops or slash-and-burn farming. Climate change has added a new dimension of danger, with altered rainfall patterns and rising temperatures that threaten the delicate balance of the ecosystem. Invasive species, introduced either deliberately or accidentally, also compete with native plants and animals, further destabilizing the forest's ecology. Conservation efforts have been underway for decades, with Sinharaja declared a World Heritage Site by UNESCO in 1988. This recognition not only highlighted its global importance, but also helped channel international funding and expertise into its protection. The Sri Lankan government has established strict regulations for entry into the reserve, limiting visitors and requiring them to be accompanied by licensed guides. Several local and international NGOs work on conservation projects focusing on reforestation, ecological research, and community engagement. Importantly, these efforts recognize that conservation cannot succeed without the participation of local communities. Many programs now provide alternative livelihoods for villagers, such as ecotourism and handicraft production, reducing the pressure on the forest's resources. Yet, the claim that Sinharaja is 200 million years old has sparked debate. On the one hand, this narrative highlights the antiquity and uniqueness of the forest, making it more compelling for conservation and global recognition. On the other hand, scientific scrutiny reveals that while the lineage of some plant and animal species may indeed trace back to the Jurassic era, the current forest itself has not remained unchanged for 200 million years. Forests are dynamic systems that evolve, regenerate, and change over time, often in response to climatic shifts, natural disasters, and human influence. To say that Sinharaja is 200 million years old is therefore more symbolic than literal. It is a way of emphasizing its connection to the deep past rather than a statement of exact chronological fact. This distinction is important because it reminds us that conservation must focus not only on preserving a static past, but also on ensuring a sustainable future. In this sense, Sinharaja represents both continuity and change. It is continuous in the sense that it has preserved ancient lineages and ecological structures across vast geological timescales. At the same time, it has changed in response to its environment, evolving new species and adapting to new conditions. This duality is what makes it so fascinating for scientists and so important for conservation. Protecting Sinharaja means not just preserving its current state, but also allowing it to continue its evolutionary journey, to remain a living laboratory of life that can adapt to the challenges of the future. As we examine the forest's importance more critically, it becomes clear that its value extends beyond biology and ecology. Sinharaja is also a site of knowledge production. Researchers from around the world come here to study evolutionary biology, ecology, and conservation science. The forest has yielded insights into plant-animal interactions, symbiotic relationships, and the effects of fragmentation on ecosystems. It has also inspired new approaches to conservation that emphasize community participation and holistic ecosystem management. In this sense, Sinharaja is not just a subject of study, but also a teacher, a place where humanity can learn lessons about coexistence, resilience, and sustainability. While the Sinharaja Forest is celebrated for its biological wealth and evolutionary legacy, it is equally important to consider the human dimensions of its existence. For centuries, the forest has been interwoven with the lives of people who inhabit its peripheries. These communities, often marginalized in the broader context of Sri Lanka's economic development, have historically relied on the forest for sustenance, medicine, and spiritual meaning. Herbalists still collect plants from Sinharaja that are used in traditional Ayurvedic medicine, and these remedies are passed down through generations as part of a living cultural heritage. For them, the forest is not merely a collection of trees and animals, but a partner in survival, a living pharmacy, and a sacred ground. This perspective complicates conservation narratives, reminding us that protecting Sinharaja is not only about safeguarding biodiversity, but also about respecting cultural traditions and human rights. The relationship between people and the forest, however, is not static. As Sri Lanka has modernized, the pressures on rural communities have intensified. Agricultural land is scarce, and opportunities for employment outside of farming are limited. For many villagers, the temptation to encroach upon forest boundaries is strong, as it promises immediate gains in food production or income from timber. This creates a paradox. The very communities that historically coexisted with the forest are now seen as threats to its survival. Conservationists face the delicate challenge of balancing ecological protection with socio-economic development. Any conservation strategy that ignores the needs and aspirations of these people risks not only failure, but also injustice. Therefore, the integration of local voices into conservation policy has become an essential component of efforts to preserve Sinharaja. By creating alternative livelihoods, such as ecotourism, small-scale agriculture outside the reserve, or forest-friendly enterprises, conservation programs aim to reduce human pressure on the forest while ensuring that communities benefit directly from its continued existence. Tourism represents both a challenge and an opportunity for Sinharaja. On one hand, ecotourism has provided a sustainable source of income for local guides, guest houses, and artisans. Visitors from around the world come to witness the forest's rare birds, amphibians, and breathtaking landscapes, creating a global constituency for its protection. On the other hand, unchecked tourism can itself become a threat, introducing waste, noise, and physical damage to sensitive ecosystems. The strict regulation of tourist entry into the reserve is thus not merely a bureaucratic formality, but a vital safeguard for the forest's ecological integrity. Unlike mass tourism destinations, Sinharaja can only sustain small groups of visitors at a time, ensuring that its trails, rivers, and wildlife are not overwhelmed. The challenge for Sri Lanka is to expand the economic benefits of ecotourism without compromising the forest's long-term survival. Beyond tourism and local livelihoods, Sinharaja is part of a global conversation about climate change and biodiversity loss. Rainforests across the world are under siege, from the Amazon to Southeast Asia, and each fragment that survives becomes more precious as a buffer against planetary crises. The role of Sinharaja in carbon sequestration, rainfall regulation, and soil stabilization connects it directly to the fate of human populations across Sri Lanka and beyond. When forests like Sinharaja are degraded, the consequences are not limited to biodiversity loss. They ripple outward in the form of floods, landslides, droughts, and diminished agricultural productivity. In this sense, the preservation of Sinharaja is not a luxury or a matter of national pride alone. It is a necessity for survival in an era of environmental precarity. The forest stands as a microcosm of the global struggle to reconcile development with sustainability, to ensure that economic aspirations do not come at the expense of ecological collapse. Scientific research has consistently highlighted the uniqueness of Sinharaja. The genetic diversity contained within its plants and animals is of immense potential value, not only for conservation, but also for medicine, agriculture, and climate resilience. Species that have evolved in isolation for millions of years may hold biochemical compounds with the ability to treat diseases, resist pests, or adapt to changing environmental conditions. However, this also opens up ethical questions about bioprospecting and intellectual property. Who owns the genetic resources of Sinharaja? Should international corporations be allowed to exploit its biodiversity for profit? And how can benefits be fairly shared with the communities that have protected this forest for generations? These questions underscore the need for a legal and ethical framework that treats biodiversity not merely as a resource, but as a common heritage of humanity, to be used responsibly and equitably. The debates over Sinharaja's age also reveal how narratives shape conservation. When scientists or journalists describe the forest as 200 million years old, they are engaging in a form of storytelling that elevates its significance in the public imagination. While the claim is scientifically imprecise, it resonates emotionally, capturing the awe that people feel when confronted with the deep time of evolution. This kind of narrative can mobilize public support and political will for conservation, but it also risks oversimplifying complex ecological realities. A more nuanced view recognizes that while the forest's lineage may stretch back to the Jurassic era, its present form is the result of countless cycles of regeneration, adaptation, and change. Understanding this dynamism is crucial for effective conservation, because it shifts the focus from preserving a static relic to nurturing a living system that must continue to evolve in the face of contemporary challenges. Looking to the future, the fate of Sinharaja will depend on a combination of local action, national policy, and global solidarity. Locally, the empowerment of communities is essential. Programs that provide education, healthcare, and economic opportunities reduce the reliance on forest resources and foster a sense of stewardship. Nationally, the Sri Lankan government must prioritize the enforcement of environmental laws, allocate sufficient funding for conservation, and integrate Sinharaja into broader development strategies. Globally, the responsibility lies in recognizing that forests like Sinharaja are part of the planetary commons. International funding, technology transfer, and research collaborations can strengthen conservation efforts, while global movements against climate change and biodiversity loss can provide the political momentum needed to sustain them. One of the most inspiring aspects of Sinharaja is its resilience. Despite centuries of human contact and decades of logging, the forest continues to thrive. This resilience is not infinite, but it offers hope that with proper care, Sinharaja can endure for generations to come. Its survival story is also a lesson for humanity, that ecosystems, if given space and respect, can recover and regenerate. Protecting Sinharaja is therefore not only about saving a forest, but also about affirming a broader ethic of coexistence. It is about recognizing that human well-being is inseparable from the health of the natural world, and that our future is bound up with the fate of places like Sinharaja. In reflecting on the significance of Sinharaja, one cannot escape the sense of wonder that it inspires. To walk through its trails is to step into a living cathedral of green, where towering trees filter the sunlight into golden shafts, birds call from unseen perches, and the air itself seems heavy with the pulse of life. It is a place where time slows down, where the modern world with its noise and haste feels impossibly distant. This aesthetic and emotional dimension is as important as the scientific and ecological ones. People protect what they love, and Sinharaja's beauty is one of its most powerful defenses. By inspiring awe, it nurtures the desire to care for the planet, to protect not just this forest, but all the ecosystems that sustain life. Ultimately, the story of Sinharaja is the story of interdependence. It is the story of a forest that connects the past to the future, the local to the global, and the human to the non-human. It reminds us that our actions have consequences, that our survival depends on the survival of other species, and that the line between nature and culture is far more porous than we often imagine. To preserve Sinharaja is to embrace this interdependence, to accept the responsibility of guardianship for a world that is both fragile and resilient. As the pressures of the 21st century mount, this responsibility becomes ever more urgent. The forest cannot speak for itself. It relies on us to tell its story, to defend its rights, and to ensure that its legacy continues. Thus, in the grand scheme of things, Sinharaja is more than a Sri Lankan treasure or even a global heritage site. It is a testament to life's capacity to endure, adapt, and flourish. It is a reminder of what is at stake in the struggle against environmental destruction, and it is a beacon of hope that shows us the possibilities of renewal. In protecting Sinharaja, we are not merely conserving a patch of land. We are affirming our commitment to life itself, to the values of respect, humility, and coexistence that are essential for the survival of humanity on a fragile and finite planet. The forest's whisper, carried through the rustling of its leaves and the calls of its birds, is clear. Protect me, and you protect yourself. Destroy me, and you destroy your own future. It is a message that transcends borders and generations, one that must guide our actions today if we are to leave a livable world for tomorrow.